Welcome to this Global Health series. My guest this time is Dr. Ana Vazquez-Pagan. Is that how you pronounce the name?
Yes, yes. That's it.
Dr. Pagan is right now in Accra, Ghana, but she's originally from Puerto Rico. I am not going to even attempt to summarize her bio, so I'm going to invite you to please tell us who you are, what you do, and then we'll take it from there.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you here today, Vivian. Thank you so much for having me. I have a little bit of untraditional journey, so to speak, but I was raised in the archipelago of Puerto Rico in the Caribbean. So I grew up there until I was about 18 years old, and then I actually moved to Boston to pursue my bachelor's degree in science, specifically in biology, at Northeastern University. And during this time, I had the opportunity to do a couple of internships. One of them led me to work in Germany for about 6 months. Another one led me to work in Dana Farber in Harvard Medical School, which is how I was lucky enough to stumble upon the Global Health Catalyst Summit. And I think that was the beginning of a series of, interests and inquiry into the world of global health. So that actually then led me to pursue a secondary higher degree, which was a PhD. And I decided to pursue it in infectious diseases, particularly because I understood coming from the Caribbean that tropical and neglected diseases are an incredible area of study that is really important, but it's somehow underfunded and also understudied in general. A lot of these diseases don't really affect the entirety of the global north, so they aren't as well studied as they probably should be. So I really wanted to undertake that during my further studies, and I started with influenza virus, which was the focus of my PhD research. But I was actually able to learn a lot of different techniques that are applicable to a number of different pathogens. So once I finished my PhD, which I'm a recent PhD graduate from a couple of months ago, I actually applied to a Fogarty Global Health Post-Doctoral Fellowship to really tie that together and that journey, going from undergraduate, meeting Dr. Ngwa, and really being able to be a part of the Global Health Catalyst Summit, to now actually being in the field working with some of the people that are, vital key players in the field. And after my PhD, I obtained this fellowship. And like I mentioned, I worked with viruses during my PhD, but I was able to switch pathogens. And I'm currently working on malaria here in Accra, Ghana, which is where I'm currently stationed. So it's been a little bit of a, sort of crazy journey, but I think that the beauty of it is that global health there's so many components and details and people that are involved in the field. So I feel like that background has given me like that unique perspective that may be needed to continue growing and expanding in the field. So yeah.
I love crazy journeys because through those crazy journeys, we amass a lot of experience that we apply then to our work and make the work more meaningful. And with your immense experience, you've done so much. I am, overwhelmed and I don't even know where to start. But, just get us back to kind of your work with Dr. Ngwa and the global health. I know that was more focused on cancer, but how have some of the, what are some of the best practices or the experiences through that process that you are applying to now your work with malaria in Ghana? And I must add that it's a coincidence that yesterday we had a talk about the CEO and founder of Malaria No More. So, which is
wow. Okay, that's crazy.
Right.
So
and that's
timing.
It's perfect timing. I cannot tell you, how excited I am to learn about what you're doing. But yeah, to start, what is some of the best practices and experiences that you're transferring to your current work?
Yeah, so I think I started, and I still consider myself a benchtop researcher. I was really in the lab doing a lot of the different techniques and assays. So I come from a more basic science background. But I think one of the things that I really appreciated about meeting Dr. Ngwa so many years ago now, but which I'm so thankful for, he actually introduced me to the Global Health Catalyst Summit, and I was able to participate and even present in it. And I think something that I noticed at that point, which was almost at this point, probably about 6 years ago, was that need to really entangle and sort of intertwine a lot of the different problems that we have in different parts of the world. There's a lot that can be done by coming together and collaborating, and that can also be further facilitated by, scientific communication, which I think is something that we're seeing having more of an emphasis now, especially after the pandemic. A lot of more the public and the general audience has become more familiar with a lot of the scientific terms that maybe before 2020 that wasn't as common. So I think my experience with Dr. Ngwa and the Global Health Catalyst Summit at a younger age gave me that perspective of how much that is needed. Even now, further in my career, sometimes as basic scientists, we can kind of make things a little bit more difficult to understand. And when we are trying to distill the science, the importance of it, to funding agencies and to try and really make the general public and the audience understand the importance of our work, we kind of struggle with that a little bit. And I think, like I mentioned, we did see that with the pandemic. That was a good example. So I really think that's a really key and vital component of some of my work, to be honest, because right now here in Ghana, I interact a lot with clinicians in the hospital, with people that are the ones that are signing up for some of the studies, as well as scientists. So you have to have the ability to be able to distill and communicate the science, the importance of it in a larger context, and have that bigger picture always clear. Especially when you go from doing all these little things in the lab to really translating that to, what's going to be the ultimate goal of the science that you're doing. And I think that was one of the biggest lessons I learned during my time with Dr. Ngwa, which was, as you mentioned, working in more cancer-related projects.
Right. It's fantastic, the sharing that experience, because, as somebody in communication, my thought is just going around how the communication part of what you're doing. And, my question to you, as somebody who went through that process with the GHC and in your current work, like how best can we communicate some of the work that is being done in these spaces that, like you said, the science can be more complex to explain or to really make it consumable to the general public, who we need as stakeholders in this work?
Of course. Well, I feel like the first thing is to practice. And it can be, I never really take for granted that I know and I'm the best thing in everything, because I think we always have to habituate ourselves to really think about the audience we're presenting to. I think as basic scientists, we can sometimes always think we're presenting to peers and scientists, and that may not be the case. People have different backgrounds, levels of education, I think, and especially too, I come from a bilingual household. I also think of other languages as well. And so when you're trying to present this to, like you mentioned, our general public, who are really some of the most important people that need to understand what's happening, because the work is for them, I think you just need to make sure that the story that you're telling, that you're presenting the problem that they're facing, and that's something that everyone can empathize with because they're living it. And then, sort of walk them through some of the purpose of your work. I think that the best thing that I've noticed here, especially with some of my Ghanaian mentors, is the honesty with which and authenticity with which they present some of the work to their communities. Mm-hmm. And I think not undermining or, sort of thinking that some of your community engagement liaisons can be really important in that development, because at the end of the day, having those collaborations, like I just mentioned, is going to be critical so that you make sure that the message that you're trying to vocalize gets sent through the community in a way that makes sense to everyone, that everyone is really understanding that, and that everyone is on the same page.
Right.
And I think that's going to be critical to, to make sure that you're taking the steps that are appropriate in that process, and really becoming self-aware of maybe the limitations you have in your role to communicate that message. And that's, And that's okay, you know, because I don't speak, for example, the local language here in Ghana, and I acknowledge that. So I know that that message will come better from some of our other teammates, and that's what makes them so unique and vital as well in terms of getting and carrying the work across that we're trying to, you know, sort of implement so that we can get some answers that hopefully solve some of the malaria problems we have in the region.
Fantastic, parallels of ideas on how to navigate this, which, it's a good segue into my next question. Like, you have worked in the cancer space and the virus or epidemiology space, and now you're in malaria, in the malaria space. So what are some of the parallels you've seen in those three spaces when it comes to healthcare delivery or research, because you're doing a lot of research that can be, some of the best practices that can be applied to, strengthen the healthcare systems?
Yeah, well, I think from a basic scientist standpoint, sometimes the techniques actually don't really deviate. You know, a lot of the critical thinking that we apply to the science per se is not really going to change as much. I think what may change is the understanding of each disease state. So that could be, you know, something that I, for example, struggle with a little bit, just trying to like really navigate understanding each disease. But some things that are really similar is that from which I love is the angle of the host, and you know how our immune system is really responding to some of these disease states, and really having that sort of common denominator, no matter what disease, whether it's cancer, whether it's a viral infection, whether it's a parasitic infection, your immune system is going to be responding in different ways, but it's still going to be a person's or, you know, a host sort of immune system. So I think really having that parallel across all of my scientific experiences has been pretty useful, because I sort of apply some of the same thinking that or some of the things that I've learned from other experiences to just a different disease state in terms of the more basic science component. As far as the more, I guess, bigger picture when it comes to a community and thinking about how these things are really impacting, communities worldwide, I think that just in general, when a person has cancer, has an immunocompromised immune system already from having one disease, that makes them more susceptible to having infectious diseases or having infections that are going to be able to complicate that disease state even further. So I think that everything in a way is intertwined, and that's really why I love science so much, because sometimes as basic scientists, we are very niche. Some people study cancer, some people study this, but I really have appreciated how my background has given me that larger picture, because I have seen how important it is to have that understanding, especially in the global world in general, and just to have that understanding here where we have certain diseases that we don't necessarily see in North America, for example, like malaria. So
great. No, this is great. I'm taking us back now to cancer and the GHC. Recently, the GHC had a session at the London Global Cancer Week, and it was discussing Cancer Moonshot 2.0, which is, extending the goals of the Cancer Moonshot to low and middle income countries. So one of the key questions that was asked is that if money were not were not a problem, what would you want to see being implemented, or what's the one intervention you'd like to see in the cancer space? I know you've moved on to malaria, but you still have the experience of having worked in research with cancer. So I'm posing this question to you. What, in your opinion, as somebody who is now working in these spaces, would you want to see as an intervention?
In terms of like a therapeutic intervention?
Any, as long as it's healthcare related, to bridge the disparities in cancer.
I think something that has been of interest that just comes to mind right away. I trained at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, which is one of the centers for pediatric cancer treatment. I think globally, one thing that I think it would be really interesting would be to, kind of expand what they call the Pediatric Cancer Genome Project. Like, we know for especially for children, a lot of cancers can come from genetic predispositions. And we know that a lot of that, sort of information that we have, at least at St. Jude's, is really kind of a small group of people that are able to come and get treated there. But in a larger context, if money wasn't an issue, I think it would be really good to kind of have a broader understanding of how different ethnicities and races can also play a role in some of these diseases, because we don't have that information available as much because of limited funding and other issues as well. So I do think it would be interesting to kind of have a more personalized approach. And of course, that's very idealistic, but if money wasn't an issue, I think that could be something that I can immediately think about could be useful, because that could give a better idea of seeing what genetic mutations may be specific of a certain population, and that could, in theory, like help us treat those populations better, or really have a more targeted approach when it comes to treatment, which I think is missing for some populations around the world to be represented properly.
Right. That is perfect. And when I think about what could we possibly do, I think of, first of all, of you as a bilingual person, and of the many languages that exist in the world. Like, one of my personal wish lists is that cancer be taught in other languages so that people can understand it and communicate it better. But that's a different case. Maybe I should write about that and advocate for that.
I really like that idea, and I think that's really important as well, because honestly, sometimes like translation and understanding of a disease state can be crucial for people determining its treatment or really moving forward with it, or even trusting physicians to treat certain diseases, which I think is super important, as well.
Yeah. But I love, what you've, the studying the genetics, and maybe identifying at-risk populations. That is very important, and part of that requires understanding, or the community understanding, what the symptoms are, so that they can contact the doctor in case they see some of the symptoms, understand their genetics, which is so huge, because even us who are literate, we don't understand our genetics, So how about that, communities that have less literacy rates? So there's a lot that could be done there, and I appreciate you pointing it out. But anyway, with that, is there anything that we haven't talked about, your experience with the GHC, with your current work, that you'd like to tell our viewers?
I think I've just gained a sense of appreciation, having worked here, and just seeing scientists from different parts of the world, I think has opened really a new, vast perspective. I think sometimes, at least from my experience in the United States, like in training there for my PhD, sometimes we can be a little bit narrow-minded in thinking about the global problems and challenges that exist and how to treat them. And I do think that I'm thankful for the community that the GHC has provided, my mentors, as well as the experience here, because I do think that having that perspective a little bit more open now, really learning from people here how things are done in different countries, the resources that people have available and how they use them, I think has been really fascinating for me to be able to learn from that experience and from these experiences in general, because I do think in the end it'll make someone like me a better scientist and a better communicator, as well as someone that can hopefully bridge some gaps in the future, while wherever I end up. Right. Trying to bring together some of the communities that I have been, have the privilege to work with. So I'm just thankful for this opportunity and for having been exposed to the GHC so early on with Dr. Ngwa.
Right. I remembered one question. As somebody who is in research, what are some of the tools you wish you had in a community like in Accra, Ghana, that maybe you don't have, and yet you have in the developed world?
Yeah. I think something that, I think it kind of goes a little bit with communication, because I do think we could be doing way better in some of these collaborations that are set up from the mainland United States, especially within the African continent. I think we could be doing better in making sure that those are equitable collaborations, that that people in both ends feel like they're getting similar opportunities to grow, and also funding for different assays or experiments that are going to move forward the science, especially here in the African continent. And I think especially within that, which I know some people here in Accra are really working hard to move that forward, is bioinformatics and some of these more advanced sort of technologies that I've had the opportunity to work with in the mainland United States, like single cell RNA sequencing, or spatial transcriptomics. There's a lot that's happening that I think could be brought here as well. And there should be an opportunity for students and trainees here to get that exposure. And I think from grants and collaborations, we should do a little bit better from, the United States angle to try and facilitate that more, because everything I've experienced here is met with like enthusiasm and people are just eager to learn. And I think we just need to be a little bit better about ensuring that we're actually giving those opportunities out so that the science can move forward, as well as, some of our bigger picture goals of these collaborations.
Right. And then finally, since you are now working in malaria, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to tell us exactly what you're doing with that malaria project. I come from a country that has malaria, so I'm also selfishly and biasly interested in that, just very briefly, and what you hope to see as an outcome.
Yeah, sure. So cerebral malaria is one of the more worst outcomes of having a malaria infection. You have severe malaria, severe anemic malaria, but cerebral malaria has been kind of an outcome that has not been as well studied, and hence we don't really know how to treat it as well either. This usually happens in children from 0 to 12 years old, and that's a population that I'm predominantly focused on and working with. And we essentially want to understand how it is that the parasite can cross the blood-brain barrier and actually get to the brain and cause some of these, more severe outcomes, like it is a coma or some of the long-term consequences that children may have as a result. So my work is directly trying to see what the role of what we call exosomes are in this sort of transfer from the blood to the other side of the blood-brain barrier in terms of the parasite. So in some small words, that's kind of what I'm doing, but it's a little bit more nitty-gritty than that. But essentially, we just want to understand why that's happening so that we can learn how to treat it better.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ana, for the work you're doing on the continent, for all the work the research you've been doing all these years, because it's informing, interventions, it's doing the science that is required to help prevent disease or cure disease. So on behalf of the world, thank you so much for the role you're playing in all of this.
Of course, no problem. Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk a little bit about my perspective. But I wanted to just say that, at the end of the day, like, I am a reflection of all the mentors and people that I've had the opportunity to work with, including Dr. Ngwa. So just thankful for that and thankful for this opportunity to talk to you.
Absolutely. It's been an honor hosting you on this show, and hopefully this will be one of many conversations we can have about what you're doing in Ghana. I'd love to learn more, in the subsequent months, about the progress you're making and the experiences. But for now, thank you again for being my guest. And
of course, thank you again.
To our viewers, thank you for watching this series. Till next time.